All right, once again, Stephen Scarlata. It looks somewhat different than the picture that we have up of him, but this is him, I promise. We didn't just pull a guy off the street to play the role of Stephen Scarlata.
I let myself go. I don't shave and get haircuts anymore.
This was my second time seeing this, and I have to say it is as inspiring, if not more, than the first time. I loved what you said beforehand about this being an inspiration to people who've struggled with projects or gone through. I mean, it's amazing how just unfolding the story, even knowing the story from once before, is so, and I know a lot of that's Jodorowsky and just how much of a engaging presence he is, but it's so fun to get wrapped up into that world and to have that attitude he has at the end. I always love that, where he says, you know, it's not like it's dead, it exists in all of us, you know, it exists in the people who are inspired by it. It's become something bigger than that. Yeah, I love that, it's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, his attitude about it was pretty amazing, because we thought it was going to be completely depressing. And then when he came out and was like really, you know, he was happy that it inspired so many films and his artists. Because, you know, as you saw in the movie, those, you know, if it wasn't for him, Giger and all those guys, you know, it's pretty amazing.
I often think of it like events like this, we always get the line that like people could watch that on video at home, or people could watch that on, you know, streaming services or whatever. But that's, I mean, we're all here kind of to see these movies, but part of why we're here is because it's like collective dreaming, as the old axiom goes, or it's how the movies go into all of us, and we all become something a little bit bigger, and we take something out of it. So, yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Well, what was really interesting was like seeing David Lynch's Dune, and then seeing this, and then seeing like a couple of shots of the storyboards from Jodorowsky's Dune, and then we just saw David Lynch's Dune, like the ornithopter with the worm, collecting everybody from the spice before it blows up. Like we just saw that scene, you know. So it was really cool seeing it like this. Like, thank you, that was pretty interesting. Especially the shot, this one quick storyboard of them about to ride the worm, and it's just reminds me how similar. There's only so many ways you could shoot riding a worm, so, you know, but it is very similar. Like Gabon, the guy who kept smoking cigarettes, was really cool. And what was interesting was that he kind of slipped. Didn't slip, like in one of the transcripts when we shot him. He did say that De Laurentiis had the storyboards, and as you know, like Flash Gordon was produced by De Laurentiis, so he definitely. There's a couple scenes in David Lynch's Dune, like especially when they're riding the worm, or when the worm is when we saw Jessica and Paul in David Lynch's Dune, like the worm trying to attack them for the first time before they meet the Fremen, like that's pretty much out of the storyboards in Jodorowsky's Dune. But what I'm also saying is there's only so many ways you could shoot that, so, but it's really interesting, you know?
Could you talk a little bit, I know we've talked about like why you got interested in this project, but could you talk a little bit about the mechanics of how the project came to be, past your interest in research?
It was just pretty much, I researched it, and then I took the project to someone that I was working with quite a bit at the time. And it just, you know, to be honest, it just, like how him collecting the warriors was so natural. It was like how we made the movie, everything just came naturally in. Like we were just really lucky. Like Jodorowsky said yes, and the moment he said yes, Sado came aboard, Foss came aboard, Giger came aboard, everybody came aboard. And I think what happened was Jodorowsky kind of was offered this a few times in the past, and he turned it down, but we approached him right after Dan O'Bannon and David Carradine died. And I think at that moment he was ready to tell the story, so we were pretty much in the right place at the right time, like most of Hollywood, you know, to get stuff done. So I think maybe if we asked him a year earlier, it would have been totally different.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's kind of crazy. That like you said, like his great timing story parallels what you were doing too.
Yeah, because at the time we tried to get Mobius, but they were giving us a hard time, but then we figured it out because he was dying, and it was really sad, and so that's why we couldn't get him. And I think that's what really lit the fire under Jodorowsky to finally say yes to document this. Because I think, you know, even though he's happy in this film, but I think still inside there's a little, you know, sadness that he wasn't able to get it made, because as you watch this film, I don't know if you could tell, Fando and Liz, the aspect ratio is really you know, as each film progresses, El Topo and Holy Mountain, the aspect ratio increases and his style of filmmaking increases. And when you see the storyboards, him himself as a filmmaker was growing. And that's what's really sad, is that he was combining everything he did in the past for Dune. Like, he was kind of meant to do it.
Yeah.
And especially when you see the storyboards, like, he was so obsessed with ceremonial. Like, he loved the Fremen, he loved, like, the ceremonies of the water of life and everything. And if you see films like Holy Mountain, and you see this lived-in environments he created, and the ceremonies in that film, like, it was, like, made for him to dig into that with this film. And I think that's what he really wanted to do. So it's really sad he didn't get a chance to make it, because some of the camera angles and everything in the storyboards were like, wow, it's gonna be, it was the Holy Mountain to the next level in space. It was pretty amazing.
Have any of you ever seen The Holy Mountain? Go see it, please, by all means. There's that wonderful moment when talking about him, even though he says, you know, you go with it, it lives anyway, and you could tell he's affected. That wonderful moment when he's staring straight at the camera and saying, you get, you know, poisoned by all this stuff, and it's just about this money and this shit and everything. And you could tell, like, he has such that little bit of passion and regret he's hanging on to. And it's so powerful and so touching, just that moment to just hang on him and see, you know, and the aspiration he has. I mean, I think that's when we were talking about Lynch's Dune, even though, you know, for whatever flaws the movie had, there's a mission behind it, and it's not just, hey, here's a movie and yeah, it's some people flying around and fighting and stuff. It's this attempt to try to do something that's a little bit bigger than just a movie, you know. And that's what I think is so inspiring about this, is even though Jodorowsky's making movies, he's looking at it as like, this is something way bigger than me or you or whoever, that this could be something like that. Even though it sounds kind of crazy when he's talking about making, you know, I'm the Messiah of the movie, or a movie that could change the universe. Just someone that wants to attempt that, I think, is...
Yeah, plus it's pre-internet.
Yeah,
when it came
out,
no one was going to rip it apart as much.
I know.
But it could have been, like, I mean, my theory is kind of like, even if it came out and bombed, like, it's like Blade Runner. Like, it didn't pick up its following until it came out on VHS, and all these kids in college smoking weed just, like, all of a sudden discovered it, and it widened their horizons. Like, this could have bombed, but when it came out on VHS, I bet it would have just started like a whole new cult, and it would have. Right now, we've been on like our 5th Blu-ray pressing of it or something.
Yeah.
Like, it would have lived on, and it would have caught some type of audience, even if back then it didn't. You know, and then what would have happened to him? You know, you know.
It's amazing to think about. Yeah. It's a great equalizer of home video. You know, it's like, instead of, well, when he was making this, or trying to make it, it was mid-70s, so unless you have money, you have to wait to see anything in a theater for the second time. But now, God, yeah, you could rediscover it generations and generations later.
Yeah, because if you look at so many classics that didn't win Oscars, or, you know, or bombed, they end up living on in home video and DVD. They just, you know, like I said, Blade Runner, you know, look at it, bombed. Mm-hmm. And now people love it. There's a sequel.
There's a sequel whose director is supposed to reboot Dune after that.
Yeah, if it happens.
If it happens, yeah.
I mean, I would love to see his vision of it. I think it'd be really interesting, because if you look at all of his films, they kind of deal with politics, they deal with strong character. Like, the reason why David Lynch was hired to do Dune was because De Laurentiis loved the Elephant Man. What he loved about the Elephant Man was like that aesthetic he had of like London, the industrial era, but it was also the characters. And Dune is a really strong character film, and this new director, if you've seen his films, are really strong character movies. And he could be a really good fit, but it just depends on the length of the film, I think.
It's, if you haven't heard, it's Denis Villeneuve, who directed Arrival, that just came out this year, and he was directing Blade Runner 2, and a host of other really great films. So yeah, hopefully it turns out for him. We'll see.
Yeah. I was talking with the guy who does this website called Dune Info, and if you look him up on Facebook, he's taking every storyboard from our film and screenshotting it, and all the storyboards he collected. He actually won off of eBay the first draft of Dune. It went for a lot of money, and he's assembling them on Facebook. If you look him up, it's pretty amazing. And we were talking, and he's pretty excited about the new Dune. He thinks that, you know, if that director uses some of the cast from his other films, he thinks Jake Gyllenhaal would be a great Duke Leto.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, and Benicio del Toro as Rabon.
Oh, boy.
And I don't know, I mean, I think, you never know. I mean, well, to me, you know.
Anything is possible.
Exactly. Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I can't imagine it being done. I read Peter Berg's draft, and it's really interesting, but it was going to be exactly 2 hours on the nose, and it's really hard to fit this movie into 2 hours.
Yeah. No, I was talking with someone before, saying, maybe if they have the right circumstances, they could get, like, you know, some kind of ability to do a multi-pick deal from the start. But even that, I mean, it's so hard. Although, you know, if Blade Runner 2 does really well, he'd have the clout, you know? I mean, Christopher Nolan went from doing the Batman movies, taking the clout from those, to doing something like Inception, which breaks so many rules for a major studio blockbuster. So, who knows?
I'm curious. I hope it happens, because I'm curious to see a new Dune, but at the same time, it's been attempted, you know, and it needs to be like an HBO series, pretty much.
Yeah, okay, that was like the Terry Gilliam Watchmen debate for all those years was, do you take the miniseries with less money, or do you take the money with less flexibility on time? And like, what do you do?
Yeah, I actually like Terry Gilliam's script. Changed a lot of stuff, but I think it was the best they could do at the time. It's really interesting.
I love that part too in this film. I mean, it always gets the best applause lines, but where hardly anyone's read Dune, and that's, you know, but it's great. I mean, sometimes I think you get hung up in saying, oh, well, this wasn't completely faithful to the source material, and there's that oft-repeated line about, well, you know, the source material, it's still on the shelf, you know, it's not going anywhere. But just having Dune as like this kind of like it as the idea, like the Paul Atreides has, the power of the idea of Dune germinating into something else. I think it's great.
Yeah, that was really interesting while we're making the movie. Like, I don't think anyone read it, and still hadn't read it when we were interviewing them.
Is there anything, I know you probably get asked this a lot, but is there anything you regret not being able to fit into the final feature?
Well, we always knew it needed to be an hour and a half, because we just felt like over an hour and a half documentaries are kind of tough, especially, like, to be honest, right before we premiered at Cannes, it was a really rough movie to edit. We had like 30 cuts, and it's a fully subtitled movie, and we had, you know, the soundtrack is really droney, so lots of times we're falling asleep just watching rough cuts, and it was really a tough movie to edit. And then just finally, just the gods looked at us, and right before our premiere, we just nailed this last cut, and it just fit. But we always knew it had to be an hour and a half. So, I mean, yeah, we wish it could be longer, we could fit so much more in, but
12 or 20 hours long? Or?
Yeah, but we just didn't want to push it, you know, it's just, we had a, you know, I mean, I kind of agree with it. It's just documentaries are solid when they're an hour and a half.
Yeah.
You know, especially when it's fully subtitled, and, you know, it's really tough with U.S. audiences to get into subtitled films.
That's
so, true. I mean, but all the storyboarded scenes are pretty much the scenes we really wanted. I mean, there was a couple we would love to put in, but they were just really strange. Like the guy who puts the tooth in Leto.
Oh, yeah.
There's a scene with him where they do have his wife hostage, and she's frozen in crystal, and Harkonnens are throwing this huge party, and they give him a machine gun. And they're like, we're gonna break off a piece of your wife unless you start machine gunning down this party. And the guy refuses, so they break off her foot. And then he starts machine gunning down all these innocent people at the Harkonnen party until he stops breaking apart his wife. And it's such a disturbing scene, but it was visually really interesting.
Yeah.
There's like so many, and actually all the battle scenes were like pre-Braveheart, because this is like the 70s. There are all these like desert battles without any weaponry. It was just like weird net guns and just spears, and like there was one scene where like the whole front line was children, and then the second line was adults, and the Sardaukar go through the children, but they don't show kids getting killed. The camera rises above, and you just see all the spears, and painted like kids' arms and intestines flying over until they get to the neck. Like there is so many, like I don't know how this would have been PG, but then again, if you watch a movie like Sorcerer, that's PG, and there's some extreme violence in that, so maybe this would have been 70s PG.
Yeah, it could be.
Like that Leto getting torn apart, like that's
that's
not gonna be on lunchboxes. So like, I don't know what they were thinking, or play sets. We weren't gonna be playing with the Harkonnen.
Boy, if they had just come around before George Lucas came around, maybe. You want to take some questions from the audience?
Absolutely.
Questions? Hope we didn't talk too much for this. Yeah.
I just 2 comments. As my friend pointed out, it's weird to think that we live in a universe where David Lynch was the safe choice to make Dune. And I want the dissolve in the movie from Baron Harkonnen to Wells was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And I love that.
Thank you. We had like 3 editors. Well, we went through each one, but I gotta give props to editors for, they really helped a lot with this film, but thank you for that. And what's interesting, a lot of people must know, is that Lynch turned down Return of the Jedi to do Dune, which is quite interesting as well. So
you could have had a universe where David Lynch directs Return of the Jedi and Alejandro Jodorowsky directs Dune.
And how everyone hates Return of the Jedi. I wonder if they would have liked David Lynch's Return of the Jedi.
All of our minds would have been expanded. Other questions? Yeah.
How many copies of the book were made? They said they had 1 copy and they make photocopies of it. Did they make multiple copies to circulate, or they just only have a couple?
I believe there was like 7 or 8 copies, and one was sold on. That Jodorowsky has one. I believe Diane O'Bannon still has one. One was sold on eBay right before we shot, and then there was. And I'm not sure about the other ones. I mean, Dino De Laurentiis, I believe, has one, so that's 4. I don't know where the other 3 are counted. So,
How many miles did you travel shooting this?
God. It was, well, the cool thing was everyone was in Europe, so you can kind of stay in Europe and get everybody. So that we were lucky there. At the time, Richard Stanley was in Barcelona, like writing a new screenplay. So everyone was kind of close by, which was, we were lucky. We were able to shoot it like in a month, all the interviews.
Did I read right in saying that there was an idea or concept of doing like a retail version of the concept book or something like that? Or?
Mobius passed away, and I think the rights are now tied up with his widow. So
okay.
I'm not sure if it's going to come out or. But I think your closest bet right now is going on Facebook and looking up Mark from Dune Info, who's putting it together, because he's putting so many hours into it. That's the closest you're going to be able to see right now until I guess they come to an agreement to release the book.
Yeah. Someone over here? Yeah.
What about this last film he did? 2013, when they were talking about, what was that about?
That was his autobiography. He's doing a trilogy right now. He actually, last year at Cannes, the second one premiered.
Wow.
And like there he was 84, so I guess he shot the sequel and he was 85, 86. And now he's trying to get the third one made. And it's the first one is about him being a kid growing up. And Brontis plays his dad. It's a really, if you've seen all of his films, you'll really dig it because there's pieces of all of his films in the first one. I haven't seen the second one yet, Endless Poetry, because it hasn't been released in the US yet. But it's pretty amazing. Now he's making like this trilogy about himself. But they are very Jodorowsky. Don't let the idea of autobiography, turn you off. But it's like his mom, every time she's on screen, she doesn't talk, she sings an opera. So they're really interesting and surreal autobiography. It might be the most surreal autobiography ever.
For a long time, a lot of his most popular films were tied up because Alan Klein, the infamous manager who managed the Rolling Stones and kind of helped to break up the Beatles, he was the producer or like one of the financiers behind El Topo and Holy Mountain and some of them, and he wouldn't release them for a long time because of this legal dispute. But there has been a really nice box set for I think about 10 years now. And I think they went back and did Blu-rays of El Topo and Holy Mountain, right?
Yeah, they're beautiful because I had Japanese Laserdisc VHSs that my friends from New York flew out to support me, and we used to I gotta thank them. And we used to watch them together, and you couldn't even see the picture when we used to watch these films, like at all. Like, and now you can see it on Blu-ray. They're beautiful, and we cut it out of the film. The reason why he had like a disagreement was because after Holy Mountain, they wanted him to do this sex movie called The Story of O.
Oh yeah.
And he turned it down, and then that's when all that happened, and then it was impossible to find his movies for years.
It was when Alan Klein died, and then the estate finally decided to put them back out. Yeah.
So we're very lucky, like today, to have them, and you know, we're very lucky today. It's pretty amazing. I mean, we have Star Warses, and we have like all this cool shit coming out. Like, you know, it took so many years to get it all going again.
When I remember when El Topo and Holy Mountain were re-released theatrically back in 2005, 2006. I was in Cleveland, again, props to you guys. At the Cleveland Cinematheque, they had a triple feature of Werner Herzog's A Gary the Wrath of God, Woo! El Topo, and The Holy Mountain back to back to back, which was
That's pretty amazing.
still like the greatest triple feature I've ever seen. By the end of the night, the Herzog movie looked like, you know, The Wizard of Oz, basically. And if you have seen The Holy Mountain, you know what the final shot of the film is. It was such a perfect summation of the entire night. So if you haven't, again, go see it. It's totally worth it. Yeah.
You're not a money guy, you're more of a creative guy, and this would have been, to my mind, the most horror show ever of trying to control different personalities, different people they were thinking. Did he convince you, or do you feel that, you know, if he had gotten they said there are 15 million, that this actually could have really happened?
That's a really good question. I bet it would have, but I think it would have taken way longer than they thought it would have. Because I saw a storyboard, like not a storyboard, an H.R. Giger sketch, and it was dated 1976 November. And so Star Wars came out in 77, so at that rate, it would have came out after Star Wars, and you never know because Star Wars was so huge and everyone wanted sci-fi because you had the Corman, the Magnificent Seven sci-fi movie.
Battle Beyond the Stars.
Yeah, that one, and you had all these insane Star Wars rip-offs, like Dune could have came out and probably did really well, and off of Star Wars. I just think it would have taken way longer than they thought to finish it up. Especially, I don't think the running time was going to be 12 hours. I mean, from what I could see in the storyboards and the script, the most of it, maybe 4 hours. But in the 70s, you know, the movies were long, and that ending of Paul dying, like every 70s movie ended depressingly, you know, if you think about it. It's like the most depressing decade of movies.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was out for a second, so the already got asked and answered, I'm sorry. But they were talking like they're looking for the last 5 million, right? So have they already procured 10 million for the movie?
I know Sado put a lot of money, and they had a lot of money in France ready to do it. And they were going to shoot the movie in English, too. French production that was going to be in English. Yeah, they just needed to secure...
So they're looking for the last 5 million in Holland?
Yeah, pretty much. And then they just couldn't... Well, other stuff that was cut out, speculation was that Dino De Laurentiis already had his eyes on Dune. And so, you know, he was in the system with King Kong and everything, and he could have been nudging people not to also support it. That's some of the stuff we heard. It's not in the movie, but through transcripts, through Gabon and some of the people we interviewed. That's kind of the feeling we got, was that he really wanted to make the movie, you know? And he finally got the rights to the movie and spent $40 million, and it was a disaster. So maybe, you know, it was karma. You know, like he was maybe stopping it from getting made, but look what ended up happening when he made it, you know? Yeah.
I feel like the big sort of, I mean, it's addressed, obviously, but I feel like I was undersold by the interviewees how much Brontes comes off as the victim of this whole thing, where it was like 2 solid years of learning to sword fight for nothing. And they just they talk about it, and they're like, okay, and then, oh, it changed my life, and then...
Yeah, he actually went on to win like martial art tournaments and everything. But what's really crazy about that, if you think about it, it wasn't until like maybe the 90s when Charlie's Angels and The Matrix came out where martial arts were officially in Hollywood movies, because the Stallone, Schwarzenegger movies of the 80s, they weren't doing martial arts, they were just tough guy beating people up. There was Seagal and Van Damme movies, but in the 70s, this would have been the first sci-fi movie with martial arts. Like, Jodorowsky lived in New York and loved going to those grindhouse theaters and watching the Shaw Brothers films. So he knew he wanted martial arts in his film. So there again, he was like ahead of the time, putting martial arts in a sci-fi movie. But yeah, for Brontis, it's sad. I mean, he's a really cool guy. He does theater, and we were always hoping through this movie someone would cast him, and but it is really sad for him, because it's like, what could have been if he was in this film,
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Way in the back.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned, how did you settle on Richard Stanley, and did it have anything to do with his experience on Moreau, which they made a movie about too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was a huge Richard Stanley fan, Hardware, Dust Devil, and I followed the Dr. Moreau thing when it was happening. And yeah, that was the #1 reason to have him in the movie. We had him in the movie before they shot that film, which I love, by the way. It's a fantastic documentary. If anyone hasn't seen it, Richard Stanley in this film, they did a whole documentary on him trying to make the island of Dr. Moreau and how that fell apart. Really recommend it. It's freaking fantastic documentary. But that's why we put him in the film, because he dealt with Hollywood, and he had the same thing happen to him. So we thought he'd be perfect for the film, and he really does fit in the film.
Did Frank Herbert and Jaworski collaborate at all on this at all?
No, I don't. From what I read, we couldn't get an interview with Brian Herbert. He didn't want to be in the movie. I read Frank Herbert's bio, and it just seemed, after the first attempt with Jacobs, and then when they bought the rights, I don't think Herbert had anything to do at all with Jodorowsky's. I believe he read the script and was quite upset with it. I mean, Frank Herbert was upset all the way until he tried to write a script for Dune, and then he realized how impossible it is. And then, and then gave his blessings to David Lynch, when he did his thing.
Oh, he didn't like that either.
You behind the...
Yeah.
Hey, camera guy, get out of the way.
You mentioned Terry Gilliam earlier. Do you think he'll ever make his Don Quixote movie?
I do not know. I think he was supposed to be. Is it shooting now?
It's finally shooting, yeah.
Is it?
With Michael Palin, right?
So it is
Quixote?
I'm
Supposedly.
I was just doing research on him recently. I couldn't really tell, to be honest, because he has a bunch of movies too. Defective, Detective, Good Omens. He had many movies that couldn't get made.
Can make an interesting mini marathon of all these documentaries about unmade passion projects between Lost Souls, the Stanley documentary, this, Lost in La Mancha. Yeah, it's the hot new topic for documentaries.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lost in La Mancha did come out first, So.
Yeah. One more question for you. I read recently that you're working on a new documentary about a pretty interesting subject. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Yeah, we've been working on it for a little while. Like I was saying earlier, when we shot this, everyone was in Europe, but this new one, everyone is like all over the place, so it's taking a little bit of time. But I teamed up with the guy who did the Dr. Moreau documentary, the cinematographer of that, and we're doing a doc on movie novelizations. Like, I don't know if anyone's read them, but throughout the 80s, there was many movie novelizations, and there's tons of scenes in those books not in the movie. They're usually based off of the first draft of the screenplay. But also, a lot of people who have read those books, like have a personal connection to those movies because you're inside the characters' heads. Like, for instance, Halloween 3 is an awesome novelization because you're in Tom Atkins' head the whole time, angry at his wife, and this whole thing that's going on. But we're kind of shining the light on all these writers who wrote these novelizations, who sometimes have to write a book in maybe a week, like 300. Like, a script is 90 pages, and you have to turn 90 pages into 300 or 400 pages in a limited a time, and they don't get any respect, so we want to shine the light on these artists and just and just pay them respect, and hopefully they maybe now make, maybe 8 novelizations a year, but it's only on like really huge movies like Warcraft and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what we're working on right now. It's been like a really interesting shoot. We got like some fun stories from David Morrell, who wrote the Rambo movie books, and Alan Dean Foster, who wrote Alien and The Black Hole. And it was pretty funny. Like, he actually was writing a novelization, Black Hole, and he wrote to Disney like a bunch of notes why the script is all messed up, and they never replied back to him. So, but yeah, it's been a really fun project.
You have I know you're kind of making it piece by piece, but any estimate on when you might have it finished?
Not right now. We're still shooting. We're constantly finding more and more authors to shoot. We're trying to get as many as possible in the film. We really want to document all of them, all their voices. So
That sounds fascinating. Can't wait to see it.
Oh, thank you.
Easily. Well, thank you again for coming out for this.
Oh, thank you.
And it is. I was telling him this before. I mean, it's cool to have you out here, but after finding out that you hadn't seen Dune in a theater and kind of getting to know you a little bit better and like your connection and your passion for this world, this is one of those like great highlights for me, is being able to bring you out here so you can experience this and experience it with all of us too.
Are you kidding? No, thank you, because I love David Lynch's Dune. I don't care what anyone says about it. It's like, it changed my life. I freaking love that movie. And my hope was for him to resurrect his 4 hours director's cut. I doubt it's going to happen, but that's the only thing I could have hoped. But I thank you guys, because it was really cool to see that before this documentary. It was really amazing. I can't thank you guys enough. This was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry for David Lynch's Dune if you didn't like it. I feel now responsible that, let us sit through that. But I hope you like the documentary as well. I really appreciate these guys for inviting me out. I had such an amazing time like in October, and now again, this is incredible. But,
I hope you enjoy the rest of the event too.
thank you.
And we have Dark Star coming, so there's your other connection. Stephen Scarlata. Okay.